Tony Arterburn. Did I say that
You
correctly?
did, absolutely. Arterburn.
How you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I'm very excited. Again, I am very excited for this conversation. When I look at your life, you have had a very full life. It's like living multiple lifetimes in one body. And with that, I know there are a lot of stories that you can share, but I am particularly interested in, maybe because of my own life and where I find myself today. We live in a world where everything looks so happy. Everyone's so happy. Everyone's so fulfilled. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on a lot of other people who are watching, thinking that life is just one continuous party, and I don't think that that's always the case. I think that there are, peaks and valleys and just flat land. And I love when I run across people who have lived life very full, and that the first thing that comes to mind is this person probably really knows how to live when things are dry, when you're in a valley. So I'm gonna kick it off just like that, and I'm gonna let you pick whatever story in your life you want to kind of open this up with. And just to provide some insight, because these are some very oppressive days that I find, as I spend a lot of time on the ground talking to people. I feel like people are being pressed in on all sides. And I don't know, I just feel like you may have a word of encouragement or
Sure.
perspective for us.
Yeah, good. I think it's great. I think we have, phenomenal enemies. I think we have clarity, and what else can you ask for? You live in extraordinary times, extraordinary challenges, it produces extraordinary people. It's very
Mhm.
tough. There was a lot of quiet times, and I'm reminded of quotes that, rattle around in my head. The history that I have accumulated throughout the years. But there's Vladimir Lenin, somebody I don't admire, but he had a great quote
Mhm.
about sometimes there's decades where nothing happens, and there's weeks where decades happen. We're in that cycle where there's just, I mean, you
So much.
think about where we are today. We're recording. It's the 10th of September. You go back a couple of months to the attempted assassination of President Trump.
Yeah.
And that was a big move. I mean, that was a huge shift in history, it seemed like anyway. Everybody was talking about it. He's on the cover of everything. Now it's gone. We just shift away. It's buried. You won't ever hear much about it ever again. Like one of the most iconic photos of all time, and it's gone. I mean, some people change their profile pictures on social media, but as
Yeah.
somebody who follows things like I do, uh, that's not on the headlines anymore. It's not anywhere, and that just happened. So had that been 10 years ago, we'd still be talking about it. It'd still be headline news. There'd be op-eds. There would be hearings. But we're not doing that. And the reason is because we are in a cyclical part of history. You can call it a fourth turning. If you know what that is, it
Mm.
goes
I,
back
I I
to,
was actually going to ask you. I'm looking over here at my bookshelf now. I see your bookshelf behind you, but I'm looking over here at mine to see if I can find with my eyes my book on the four turnings. That's what it sounds like. That's what you were talking about. But please continue.
yeah, there's historians back in the mid 90s, Strauss and Howe, they put together this book called The Fourth Turning. And whether you agree with their leanings or not, it doesn't really matter. That the
It
I think
happens.
I think the hypothesis is correct,
Yeah.
which is history is cyclical. And so about every 80 to 100 years, you have a major upheaval. It's usually, a change in society that's massive. You have the American Revolution. 80 years or so later, you have the American Civil War. That's why Lincoln said 407 years ago. That's 87 years when he was at the Gettysburg Address. Then you fast forward, you got the Great Depression, World War II, 80 years on from that. So we're 80 years on from the end of World War II,
Yeah.
and you're seeing major institutions crumbling, people's loss of confidence in that. I even couple that with normalcy bias, you got a bad recipe. I mean, it's like people are thinking things are going to be like yesterday, and they're not, because that's what happens when you live long enough in a system. So I think what I try to do is, like you mentioned, it is a time where you think everybody's happy, but they're not. I mean, you go to social
Yeah.
media, if you like see how the pictures are taken behind the scenes where people are always smiling and looking all perfect, and then you realize they're just like that picture was not put together that way.
Yeah.
And we're just getting glimpses. I think that causes a lot of unhappiness, and people think,
It
oh,
is.
well, that person has such a better life than me. But really getting back to the big picture here, I try to stay in gratitude for the challenges that we have, I have in my personal life. Um, I find that that's a much better that's a much better catalyst for success than just being pessimistic or being depressed or something like that. Because you're right. I mean, I'm looking at the headlines of Drudge like before we went live, and wow, I mean
Yeah.
it is clown world is a great way to sum it up. Where it's
Lunacy. Nothing makes sense.
nothing makes sense, and that's part, I think, cyclical history. There this will go on until there's the elites run the simulation, and I know people don't like me to
Mm.
call them that. They just have access to the printing press, but the global financial jet set, multinationals, they look at this and they've run the simulations, I imagine, and they call it a great reset. They want it their way. But the good news is their way is actually fighting the course of history. The cool thing about what we're watching now is that I think people and technology wants to decentralize, which equals freedom, which
Yeah.
equals liberty. Decentralization has
Always.
been the trend for the past 500 years. I mean, you look at the Protestant Reformation, followed by the American Revolution, followed by the Industrial Revolution. These are these are more and more pushes towards decentralization, whereas the financial overlords and ruling class, they want centralization, they want globalization. That is not what humanity's pushing for. It's not what people are pushing for. Actually, it's the opposite, and in a huge way. So I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting to watch, uh, and unfortunately, it's going to be, I think, painful and financially painful for a lot of people, psychologically painful for a lot of people for these changes. But I think liberty and I think personal sovereignty has a huge leg up where we stand right now. Just looking at the future.
There's so much I can double click on right with everything that you said, and I was trying to take some notes as we went along. But let me just start off with how much of the continued decentralization that we are currently experiencing and will continue to experience, how much of that continued decentralization is dependent upon Trump winning in November versus Harris?
That's a good question. So I'm of two minds with that. Trump wins in November, which is on November 5th, is Guy Fawkes Day. If you got Guy Fawkes, the inspiration for V for Vendetta. Remember the 5th of
Hmm.
November, right?
Yeah.
Kind of weird synchronicity lining up there. That was he tried to blow up Parliament, Guy Fawkes. So um, I, I think that in the short run, it would be great if Trump wins in November, because he just psychologically, I mean, people looking at Harris's economic plan, it's an absolute disaster. Unrealized gains on income.
Makes no sense.
Well, it
How
does
can
if
I
you
pay
yeah.
how can I pay you something I don't have yet?
Well, my favorite was that she just put out a plan saying that she wants to encourage, homeowners, giving homeowners 25,000 or something to buy a home. And like, so they get the home, they get the asset, then you tax them on an unrealized gain, because it goes up
Unless,
in
of course,
price.
you're an illegal in California, then you
Oh,
get
for sure.
$150,000 and you pay no taxes and don't have to refund the money or pay back the money unless you sell the home.
Well, that's a two-tiered system. They want that. So the only people they really want paying taxes are the small business owners and middle class. The I would ask all of your listeners, if they have a moment of just, self-reflection. The Democratic Party is not an organic phenomenon of political, its structure. It is just an operating system for the world's richest people. The same thing with the Republican Party. Sorry,
Thank
they're
you.
just they're funded by the same entities. I mean, it's kinda like
I was
Vanguard
going
and
to
BlackRock.
interject that. I know, I mean, like we use labels like Democrat, Republican, just because, it's a part of our vernacular. It keeps the conversation moving forward. But I know, having ran for office, worked for Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign, all the things I've been able to do, and I'm sure, and from listening to you, you see it as well, that we're not fighting. This isn't a battle between Republicans and Democrats, red versus blue, donkey versus it's not.
No,
It's those who I don't really know how to label them other than those who have versus the rest of us, those who have their hand firmly fixed on the reins of power in the nation, in the media, in the world, versus the rest of us who are just trying to live our lives, raise our family, save a little bit, for later on down the road. But I'm glad you acknowledged that.
well, I do, and I think it's important for people to realize that really there's Tucker Carlson's been covering this really well, and I've been way ahead of this curve for a while, and it's a lonely road because I ran for office too. I ran as a conservative Republican, America First, or before Donald Trump, in
Yeah.
East Texas for U.S. Congress, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how the political process works. I got to work with the last World War II veteran in Congress. He's my friend Ralph Hall. He's since passed away, but I got to speak on his behalf, and I got to travel with him and see how things were really done. And you step back and you look at it, and I think the ruling class would very much like us to believe it's Democrat versus Republican. It's really not.
Yeah.
It's those who believe there's a country and those who believe that there isn't. Okay, I mean it's globalist versus nationalism. That's really all it is. And the folks with the most wealth, and I'm not like I'm an entrepreneur. I think it's great to accumulate wealth and help people and build things. I love that. I'm not a classist in that way. What I do look at people like Davos. I look at the World Economic Forum. I look at the banking consortiums. I know history. I know what they do, and they try to manipulate history. They want, and they've been telling you for decades, we want a new world order. Um, we want a one world government. They want that the bones of that are the UN and things in the structure that was set up after World War II. But that's what they want. They're pushing towards, again, centralization. And I think people are pushing towards decentralization. The problem is that they capture the minds of millions of people with, mainstream media, and
Yeah.
those people, look at the political process, and they're galvanized. They're at war. It's tribalism. They're not thinking for themselves. It's like it's us versus them. It's red versus blue, and really, it's not. It's the people versus the plutocrats, and that's a better way to look at it, I think, because it can reframe what you're actually fighting for. What are you standing for? And it's a war of ideas. It's a spiritual war. It's a war of consciousness. And that's what I try to do with like my radio program, my podcast is I'm not trying to tell people how to live. I just ask questions. I tell people what I've observed and what's important to me. I mean,
I
I
think
think
that is so powerful and is affirming to me as well, because as I tell people all the time, trying to pick a problem to obsess over is like trying to drink water from a fire hydrant. It's impossible. Everything around you feels like it is just very overwhelming. And so, when you try to get quiet and center yourself and say, why am I here? What am I supposed to do with the time that I have and the platform that I have? In large part, I was just sharing with a friend a couple of days ago that I believe, a lot of people are living on the back of their heels. And I think in order to move forward and to get our country where we need to be, more of us need to live on the ball of our feet, leaning forward, right? Because I think it's attractive and appealing and safe to stick your head in the sand and to kind of, I'm going to bow out. I have no opinion. But I think in order to stand up against this organism of elites, quote unquote elites, you have to be willing to stand, not just stand, but stand leaning forward in
oh,
life.
You need to stand firm in what you believe, and I would second that and say we're on the right side of history. History, I think, the not only the right side of history, but and we hope that we're on, God's side, but I think we're on the right side of everything here in this argument. The prism that I try to put everything through the test is, my belief system promote life? And I don't mean just the unborn. I mean, is it a life word thing? Does it promote peace? Does it promote prosperity? Does it protect children? Does it protect families? Like, look at the border. People say, well, okay, Tony, you're for border security. I want to take the troops out of South Korea and put them in South Texas. That's what I want to do. I don't want to make them Sherpas. Like my governor in Texas, Greg Abbott, he thinks it's funny. He sends people to Martha's Vineyard. I don't want anybody going anywhere. I want them, sent back to their home country or processed as, political refugees through the legal system, humanely. But I don't want them just dumped somewhere as a political stunt. So my view on the border is we got to have the rule of law that promotes life. You could say, well, you let people roam where they want. Don't you promote that? No, because that promotes sex trafficking,
Yeah.
illegal
Chaos,
drugs, murder,
disorder.
crime. Even George W. Bush, who wasn't great on the border at all, didn't believe in it. Said that he said one in 12 illegal immigrants had a criminal record, and they just watched them walk over. So that's millions of people.
Yeah.
That's a standing army in our country that's
Mhm.
not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
Eh,
It's a shift in our values as a nation, of everything. It impacts every aspect of our lives.
Absolutely. And if you let that one thing go, then another thing goes. And I really think the border and what's happening there and our entire process with that is meant to make people give up. Because what you see is you have this powerful military. You're supposed to be able
Yeah.
to take on any nation. We spend 7 times in national defense what the next 3 or 4 countries do combined, like Russia, China, India, so on and so forth. We've spent so much on national defense, and yet we don't know what to do. We're like a pitiful giant. We can't have a border. We don't know what to do. That's
Yeah,
not true.
because
We know
everything is
exactly what.
racist.
Right.
Everything is, I'm sure they have multiple reasons for existing, right? And an insecure border, an unsecured border. I mean, I'm sure it serves that. One of the purposes it serves is to overwhelm our systems individually as well as collectively,
Yeah.
and we just throw our hands up. I'm sure there are other reasons, but I'm sure that that's probably one of the top 5 reasons, and I would apply that to the LGBTQAI plus and all the other chevrons that they're sticking on there that is all meant to overwhelm the system. It seems so overwhelming. Everything, like I said, it's like trying to find a problem to obsess over. It's like trying to drink water from a fire hydrant. You're just overwhelmed by the volume of issues all around, and I believe that it is having the desired effect when I'm on the ground. I spent 1,500 miles every week going all across Pennsylvania when I ran for office, and then equally when I was working with the Vivek Ramaswamy campaign. And I two things I know is that we have some extremely, just really good people on the ground. People who just want to live their life, who just want to, save and send their kids to college and just mind their business. But at the same time, I learned even among these really good people that apathy is real and people are overwhelmed and burned out.
Well, do you blame them? I mean,
No.
we've rolled the rock up the hill like Sisyphus. The punishment, the rock rolls back, and we have to keep rolling it forever. Uh,
Yeah,
and it seems that way.
it does.
And the game is rigged in the political process. Unfortunately, I am not giving up on it. I'm not saying, oh, nothing matters. That's just that's what they want you to do, is completely
Yeah,
give up. But you do have to step back and say, okay, if I'm doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Einstein said that was insanity. So I think
yeah.
we need to step back and say, well, maybe we have a different approach. Maybe we come up with different ways. And let's
Have you
let's
given any thought to what those different ways are
I've given
might
lots
be?
of thought to that. Yes, ma'am.
Can you
Absolutely.
share some?
Well, I think we really go towards we put our all of our emphasis on these national elections,
Mm.
and you asked me earlier, what would matter with the election? Would we see more decentralization? I think in the short term you would with Trump, and definitely you give him credence for what could be the Supreme Court nominations that he would get. The issue I have with that, again, it's more centralization. I mean, you go back to Andrew Jackson. He had the ruling from the Supreme Court. He said, "You made your ruling, now enforce it." I mean, he just literally told them they didn't matter. We make things like the judicial system matter way too much when it should be the legislative system where the people speak. And that really is what's happened, really over the last 100+ years. We just more and more centralize, giving power to the federal government. When state and local elections seem like they don't matter as much, but they absolutely do. I mean, we see what a state can do. And you talk to those people that are on the ground. There's lots of people that need to be running for office, getting involved, that aren't, because again, you go and look at a Republican primary. They even the legislative seats, it takes $1 million or something to win a seat that doesn't even pay you a salary. That's nuts. I mean, the way that you beat that, though, in my opinion, and I think if these are grassroots ways to beat him, is instead of having three candidates, why don't you have 50? Why don't we just take the numbers and put them in our favor? And this costs almost nothing to run. I've thought about ways like, and that's just one of my examples where if they like democracy so much, and that word doesn't show up in any of our documents or any of the only time democracy shows up, I think, is when Alexander Hamilton said that democracies are in shortened lifespan as they are violent in their deaths. Like, they were not fans of that word or that system. But you hear that a lot from, that's a danger to our democracy. I'm like, good. I love a danger to a democracy. That means that we can get rid of that and go back to a republic, because that's what we're supposed to be.
And let me just
Representative.
say, I mean, the democracy I think that they're talking about is democracy within these large institutions, which is a product of centralization. So it's the democracy within these, elite, quote unquote. I almost hesitate. I always hesitate and get my tongue stuck in my throat when I use the word elite.
I know, I do the same thing.
These are
I've been
horrible
doing it for
people. I
years,
don't
and
want to
it
put
always
them.
reflect. They see themselves as overlords, kind of farming us. We're just like the hoi
Yeah,
polloi. But y'all give you an example of where we went wrong. 1913, huge year for where
yeah.
America was steered into, was going to drive it off the cliff, and by design. That's where you get the Federal Reserve. That's where you get the 16th Amendment for the income tax, unheard of in our history. That would have an income tax, that's silly. But that's what, and again, that wasn't brought to you by progressives. It wasn't like that's what they frame it as, but actually, it was the wealthiest people in the country and the world at the time, created the income tax, and they did that so you could pay the interest on the Federal Reserve. But before they did that, they exempted themselves with their foundations. And it's so funny when I see progressives on the left saying tax the rich, eat the rich, all this stuff. The rich gave you that. The rich want you to do that. They don't fight that. The reason they love the income tax is so they don't have any competition. And I think it's silly that the left just continues to go down that road. I'm like, they literally wrote it, want you to buy that. But more importantly, I think that gets overlooked in the year 1913 is the 17th Amendment. Now, the 17th Amendment was what used to the state legislators would send a senator. Each state gets two senators per the
Right.
Constitution. The 17th Amendment, as you probably know, makes it to where it's a direct election of senators in each state, which means the bankers now elect your senators because they're going to fund the most and make it the political, basically like a mini presidential election
I saw
inside each
that.
state.
I saw that when I ran for Senate.
Right. And that's they will pick, right. That's exactly right. And yeah, so that's the shame, is that and I think there was more. It makes the legislators a lot more important. It makes, that's why the republic system worked, and it was slowly chipped away. Like, like
Yeah,
we didn't. A central bank isn't really part of our history. Andrew Jackson killed the second bank of the United States. He wouldn't renew the charter. He wanted "I killed the bank" on his tombstone. He said they were a den of vipers and thieves. It took from 1836 to 1913 to get us a new one, and they didn't call it they knew better, because the people,
right.
Jackson's popularity and populism really scarred that. As they didn't bring it back as a central bank; they brought it back as a Federal Reserve, and it's neither
Mhm.
federal nor a reserve. Great use of language there.
Yeah,
So
yeah, just a bunch of I read the book, I'm trying to see, I forget the name of these books that I read, but I ended up taking my family to Jekyll Island after I read the book. I mean, like, that was our family vacation. It's like, "Okay, yeah, read this book, very interesting, let mommy tell you," and we all loaded up and went over to Jekyll Island. Let me go back to what you were saying a few moments ago, a couple of things. The fourth turning, going back to that particular book. Now, I read this book probably in 2005, something like that. My babies were very, very little, but it just captured me, and I have copious notes all throughout the book because how can you read it and not actually? It forces you to read history and to understand what's going on around you. But if I recall, and you may recall it clearer than I do, and I pointed this out to a bunch of stay-at-home moms after the 2016 election because I was like, these two men predicted Trump.
right,
If you look at the four different types of generation in this saculum of 80 to 100 years, you get the same four types of groups of people, and they predicted that at that time, 2016, that we would either fall off the ledge altogether as a nation and go into the history books of like every other great nation, or the people, the populace would rise up, and there would be this second win given to us. And I believe, I mean, it was so clear, this person, they didn't name him Trump, they didn't name him, but they described what he would be like and how he would get into this position. And it's like, and I mean, it's so clear. I just read it to these bunch of liberal stay-at-home moms at the time. And so now we had that. He was supposed to have stayed in at least two terms. We saw what happened with 2020. And so now here we are again. And I think this may be kind of a stutter step in their four turnings just because of the 2020 debacle. But where do you think we are in this four turnings?
well, I definitely think it's not settled. What you mentioned, and probably more than the man is, and that had been bubbling up under the surface for
Yeah.
years. I mean, really, post Cold War, uh, I think there was a reflexive feeling within the country to rebuild and reset the economy and other things that we didn't do. We actually reset it in a bad way. We went and did NAFTA,
Yes,
the
I
North
was just about
American
to
Free Trade Agreement.
say.
We did GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the TPP, which was Trump
Yeah.
was able
We
to,
brought China into the World Trade Organization.
yeah,
Yeah.
90 days after 9/11, December 11th, 2001, China brought them into world trade and gave them most favored nation trading
Yeah.
status. I throw out figures all the time. It rattles around. And George W. Bush, under his administration, 1 in 3 manufacturing jobs disappeared.
Yeah.
55,000 factories. We literally just gave things away in
We did.
in really sacrificing American sovereignty to on the altar of internationalism,
And the
multinational
dollar.
corporations, and that we pawned America's soul. And my wheelhouse too is currency. We can talk about that later, but that's that when we went off the gold standard, when we no longer when we had a free floating fiat currency. Not another thing that's not part of our history.
Yeah.
The lurch, that the natural reaction, and what's so funny is I ran on those things that because I believed in it. I started, I remember after my third tour, when I was coming home after my stint in the military, I read a book by Pat Buchanan called The Death of the West. And I go, wow, I'd never really had anybody put history that way. And I started to understand our political process so much better because he spoke about, not just the political side, the economic side, but things like cultural Marxism, like how real that was, that the intellectual influence of cultural Marxism in our society from the 1930s onward, for the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s in this country, and how it had affected, infected, not just affected,
Right.
every aspect of what we were, watching play out. And I started to pay more attention to like things that he had predicted, like, economic downturn because we continue to consume more than we produce. And these were things that were antithetical. Again, going back to our founding, if you look at Mount Rushmore, there's, the four figures on Mount Rushmore, all of them believed in tariffs. Uh, if you look at all of our paper currency, all the figures on our paper currency believe in tariffs. All this stuff that we were doing in the modern age, or so-called, when the 20th century, was antithetical to all the things that we were built on. Like we were giving, we're doing free trade, and they believed in gold and silver. They believed in like only Congress can coin money, and it has to be gold and silver. We went away from that, and then we let these, this unknown banking cartel run our money supply, which is the Federal Reserve. So everything that we've done, and it's kind of a magic trick, because you think it's normal. Well, it's not. I mean, it's just what the ruling set wanted to do. So I
It's
think we
the
just
new normalization
right.
of, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I can't help but to think about Kamala Harris, what can be unburdened by what has been. And although we make memes of that, if you really double click on it,
Yes.
she's describing a lot of what you're describing, right? Of how our founding fathers, those who are on our money, those on Rushmore, what they did, and how we are who we are as a nation, the greatest nation, I believe, that has ever existed, in overwhelming large part because of these particular men you just mentioned, and their policies of gold and silver, not fiat, tariffs, not just handing it away to people, a secure border versus an open border. But those things would be that part of her speech, what can be unburdened by what has been. Let's do away with what has been. Let's erase our past so we can be unshackled, unburdened, and we can create a new reality. Based
Oh,
on what?
well, that's a
Open
great
borders
question.
based on what?
Well, there's a couple of things come to mind. Two quotes. Will Durant, who wrote the Story of Civilization, like the 11 volumes, his entire life's work. He has a great quote. It said that insanity is the loss of memory. So that's one thing. When you don't remember
Wait, wait,
when
wait,
you're
wait, wait.
disconnected
That's
from your
good.
past, you literally go insane. But I think about Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet.
Insanity. Say that again. Insanity is what?
Insanity is the loss of memory. If when you forget your past or where you came from, you have no roots, and that really brings me to Solzhenitsyn.
Mm,
Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet dissident, he said, if you want to destroy a people, first sever their roots.
mm.
So when we sever our roots, we take down our statues, we close down museums, whatever we make something forbidden. You can't talk about it. It's not politically correct. You can't even go into that history. You can't discuss it. You are severing roots. Or, you can even go into Orwell about controlling who controls
Yes.
the past controls the future, right? And who controls the present controls the past. Those who control this present definitely want to erase things or replace the past, whether we're just with a view that everything was terrible and there's no value in
There's
our
nothing
founding at
good.
all,
Tear it all
nothing
down.
good. Right. And, every nation has its sins and things that we should examine. Gosh, so many quotes around, like just thinking about Cal Coolidge. He said that nothing un-American can survive in the sunlight. So I say, put the sunlight on it. Everybody,
Mm.
we should talk about our past. We should examine it. It doesn't necessarily, we don't have to have just so much pride in everything that we can't, be called to account, but we should remember what worked for us. I mean, goodness, we used to be the manufacturing marvel of mankind. We were the arsenal of democracy, right? And now what? We're the world's
And
greatest
now
desert.
what? And now we've sent it to Taiwan, to the Philippines, to China, to the rest of the world, right? And talk about severing us from our roots. I mean, what better way to do that than to move out from around the world, people who don't share our values, who get to just walk right into our country, and now they're cutting the heads off of ducks and cats and eating pets, right? I mean, that's a shift in value. Why would they ever stand and put their hand over their heart and pledge their allegiance to this flag, to this nation, one God. What God? When you're bringing people in from around the world that have more than one God or no God or whatever it may be. It's a different set of value that is also serving to sever us from our roots and unburdening us from the past so that we can be whatever that is, right? Whatever the elites decide that should be, like eating bugs and enjoying it.
Well, that's the plan they have for you. Well, if they have, well, they may not, it may seem like they even have a plan, but they really, when you talk about a great reset, when you look at the vision of the World Economic Forum, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy. No, you won't. You won't be happy if there's no property rights. By the way, someone will own something. It just won't be you. That they have a vision of being the landed gentry forever, kicking the ladder down with no upward mobility. What do you think this tax plan is all about? What do you think they got the 87,000 IRS agents for? You think it's going to
And why
affect
do you think people think that the rich is going to come up with policies that negatively impacts them? Like that just doesn't seem like common sense. And yet people are like, "Oh yeah, this tax plan from the rich is going to stick it to them
stick it to
themselves."
themselves? Right. And I just,
Never do that.
it is interesting. And I wonder why people don't get that. And I say that with like not even judgment. I mean, if you watch the news, why doesn't that thought occur to you? Like these two parties, I mean, the political system itself is funded by, and I'm talking about the establishment of it, not talking about the grassroots people making calls and knocking on doors. I'm talking about those who push the policy are the same people. It's like, they're the same
Make
person.
any sense. And
It really,
now and I would use that line of reasoning with judgment. I know you said no judgment. I have complete judgment for these people. But like my very dear friends who are Black, and I remember during 2020, and they're just telling me about how racist the country is and how horrible Black people have it in the country. And it's, she's mixed, but, still Black. But here I am, a little Black girl who grew up on a pig farm in Southern Alabama, grew up in, I often say underneath the bottom rung of the economic ladder in a home with no insulation, no running water, outhouse in the back, well on the side. And that same house, my great 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 grandmother Rhoda lived in it, and she was a slave. So I have the blood of slaves coursing through my veins. I know history, the good, the bad, the ugly. And here she is telling me that, instructing me about how racist the country is and how horrible it is and how we must vote for this white man, Biden, in order to solve all our problems. And I was like, so you're telling me that white people are the reasons why we have all of these problems as Black people, but now I got to vote for the white man in order to solve all of my problems as a Black person? It's so void of logic.
I agree with that. And the Democratic Party, and if you know that history, I'm sure you do, going back to that shift from, the Martin Luther King era to the Lyndon Johnson era, through Kennedy's death. And all of a sudden it's just, there's this shift, because, Martin Luther King was a Republican.
Yes.
And there's this shift, and had Nixon only done a little bit more as a candidate in 60, had he, that's not the way they went. And of course, it solidified the voting patterns and blocks, and now we have the welfare state and other things that happen. It's really unfortunate, not just to Black families, but to lower income families in general, and like just getting
Yeah.
getting caught in this perpetual cycle of assistance. And again, it's just been really, I mean, look at our culture.
Yeah.
We have since Roe v. Wade, you've got an entire generation of Americans that are just missing. And I mean, a lot of Black
But we're not
babies, a
supposed
lot
to
of
see any of
Hispanic.
that. I mean,
Mhm.
but we're not supposed to see any of that. Like, we're not supposed to notice that there are no Republicans in predominantly Black communities, but they keep blaming Republicans and their policies for their woes. We're not supposed to, acknowledge that. I mean, however, if you go to the website, the last time I went, to the Social Security website, that is one of the reasons they say Social Security is so underfunded, is because of abortion, the high number of abortions, and people
That
who are
interesting.
supposed to be contributing members in our economy are just gone. But we're not supposed to notice that.
Well, I mean, you weren't supposed to say the words great replacement either, but I bet you if I could get a statistician to lay over the graphs of people that we've allowed to immigrate here over the graph of the children that were aborted since Roe v. Wade, I bet you they'd fit.
Oh yeah,
And
wow.
that
I didn't
by
think of it that way,
definition
but yeah.
is a
But
replacement.
there is obviously a replacement, not just of color. That's why I think most Republicans get marred and, get stuck in the mud, is like, oh, they're just
Culture.
replacing white people. No, I don't think
Culture.
these people, I'm sorry.
It's culture.
Yeah, culture. And culture is made up of what? Values, right? Beliefs, how we see things. Like, that's how you define culture. It's a set of values and beliefs and things we do and don't do. And they're replacing all of that with people who are coming from all around the world who have their own set of values, that may not necessarily, that may be um, antithetical to our values here in America. And so that's the big picture. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, Immigration Act of 1965, Teddy Kennedy. It changed the origin. You know, we always go back to immigration in this country is the melting pot. You always hear that at the beginning of the 20th century
Mm,
because they had the great waves of the Irish and the Polish and the Russian and, Jewish immigrants and people European, mainly Christian stock or Western civilization. That changed in 1965. And like I said, I've always had this theory if you could just lay it out, I bet it was, that's supposed to be a conspiracy theory, but no, you're right. I mean, you go look at the 1960 election, and this is from reading Pat Buchanan, but we talked about the black families and white families. Yeah, there might have been a lot of separation. You had segregation in some areas, and it had that, but we had the same channels on television. We spoke the same language, fought the same wars, lived through the same Great Depression. There's a continuity of culture, and we just again, Teddy Roosevelt called it best. He said, "You don't want to turn into a polyglot boarding house for the world." And that's if you look at the headlines and people eating cats and you know the problems that we got Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment buildings and in
yeah, but you're not
Colorado.
supposed
And
to see that. You're not supposed to see that. That's just
it's the
one
dark
building.
side of what's the dark side of no rule of law. I mean, would you respect a country that doesn't even guard its borders, just allows you to waltz right in? Do you even care? You
I
know,
mean,
um,
but the reality is that we know that places like Venezuela is using this as another form of warfare, of emptying out their prisons and sending their worst people up here to us. Like, we people have now documented this, and we know this to be more true than not true, and yet, we're living where we're living. But I want to get back to my question about, where do you think we are in the fourth turning? Because I do agree. We I said, stutter step. You said it's not complete.
right.
I do believe 2020 kind of disrupted, that election in 2020 kind of disrupted the flow of things in these fourth turning. So
I
do
agree
you
with that.
believe that we're there?
I think what Trump was able to do, that that I think laying under the surface had been there for a long time, is just appeal to the nationalism in the country and say it's time for a change. We need to focus on this country. Our bridges are crumbling. Our airports are terrible. Our roads are a disaster. You can just see there's entropy all over I think it's what he ran on, and the commercials were like 2016. Uh, I remember I wrote articles for the Trump campaign, and one thing he didn't ask me to, or they didn't ask me to. I wrote him. I was after I'd ran for Congress, I was the first candidate to endorse. I was really excited about that campaign in 2016 because it was something that I've been talking about for a long time, and I believed it was real.
Yeah.
That it was the people. I think were going to respond well to it. The water is very muddy now.
Yeah.
It's not as easy to communicate what America First is. I think we're just again the message because of 2020 and that operation. Whatever your opinion on what that was that happened is, I mean, you look back on it, it to me, no coincidence there. That I think there was a play made, especially the lockdowns, the coordination across the globe for that. You're fighting a system, and that's what this all boils down to. It's globalism versus nationalism. We need to get back to that. It's kind of that's the root. That's our, you know, that's our base. Is really just principle of, you know, standing for a country.
And
We've
that's what
lost
I mean
ourselves.
when I say we have to not only stand, but lean forward. I think the only way to the other side is to just go through this. I think any side doors we had to, you know, not have to go through what we are going through and will continue to go through. I think those opportunities have passed. And I think the only way, I think it's gonna cost us something to stand up, obviously, and speak truth. You're going, you know, whatever the different ways, but, you know, being canceled, fired, whatever. But now they are, I think it's the ERA, they're actually trying to pass a law that they will criminalize you speaking out against things. And look at what's happening in UK. It's the exact same kind of thing that they're trying to bring here, is to actually um you know, not only do you get shunned and fired, but now you could do some jail time if you
Yes,
speak out. I think it's going to cost us something to get through this.
I agree, and I think you'll find there'll be different states and municipalities and counties that will become kind of sanctuary counties for the Constitution, for freedom
And
of
that's what
speech.
you mean by local versus
Got to
national.
go local. I think if
And we
we,
got to get in that position. Okay,
right,
I got
I mean, I care about elections, but
right.
I would care more about who your sheriff is than
Yeah.
just about anybody. Given look what happened in 2020. I mean,
Yeah.
um, you know, and there been different circumstances, and this is kind of the simulation I run in my head. You know, when you ask me about the election, does it matter? I'm concerned when people get comfortable with whoever they elect because they seem to stand down when we go, oh, we got our person, so we're good. We'll go back to whatever. No, 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 no.
Yep.
That's when you push harder. You hold them accountable. You know, and
Yes.
if they ran on something, I don't care who they are, they hold them accountable because that's the only way you're going to continue to have any. You can't lose the momentum, and we
Yeah.
do that a lot
In
because
the Republican Party specifically.
and it was because on our side or whatever you want to call us, those are grassroots conservatives, people that believe in the country. We don't want to be involved in this. It's you
Yeah.
know, it's like it's a dirty game, and it's disappointing. It's heartbreaking, and you're just like, okay, I got it, I won, good. I'll go back on and continue. It's like we're George
Live my life.
Washington. We're going back to the farm. Like George Washington hated politics, right? He's like, it's
Yeah.
beneath me. I'm going to go back to Mount Vernon. I get that. But the problem is like Plato said, if you allow, if you don't get involved in politics, you're going to be ruled by your inferiors, and we're just
Oh
ruled
my
by
goodness, that's
well,
where we
not
are.
just our inferiors, but it's bad. I mean, it's this is the worst. This is the worst it's ever been in this country. The character of the people that are in Washington D.C.
You
is
know, I mean, I love studying history like you, love reading it. Um, and I know that in 1776, 1787, during the Constitution, it was, I mean, it was like the Wild Wild West. They were shooting people. People are lying and everything. It was horrible. And it feels a lot like what we're going through today, except for, so I could be in that camp that says, listen, we've been through this before. And as a nation, we gotten through it. But the difference I see, I live here in Pennsylvania and right outside of Philadelphia. I OD on history and going to the different historical sites here, and love taking family and friends. And every time you walk into one of our founding fathers' homes, always seems to be on the left in the front of the house is their library. And the docent will say, almost every single time, they had books from the floor to the ceiling and they read all of them.
right,
And you look at our founding father, they were, I mean, I may not agree with them on things, but they had debate. They were willing to debate an issue. They had their points, their counterpoints. They knew my points, and they engaged in this rigor. And so even if I don't agree with some of their writings, I can see the thought. It was thoughtful. It wasn't character assassination or memeing people, but they debated and they were intelligent, read everything. Today, I'm looking at our quote unquote leaders, and I have had them say to me, "Oh, I don't like to read." I'm like, "What?" But you have an opinion? Or now understanding that even the process by which we select our quote unquote leaders, it's really Republican consultants who are picking. I'm assuming the same thing is happening over on the Democrat side, but I'm not a Democrat. They suck. I don't care. But looking at the Republican side of things, like they are selected. The people we go and pull the lever for in the
Pre-select.
ballot, these are people that really consultants, political consultants look at and say, this is who we want to run. And the only two criteria for them is, what is your name ID? If it's high, we can fundraise, or if you're independently wealthy, because then you can seed your own
Understand.
campaign.
Right.
And that is how, literally, I can't even begin to express it enough because I've seen it. I've walked behind the curtains now, that this is how we select who is going to run in the Republican Party. I'm assuming Democrats are doing it too, but I'm not over there. But over here on our side, this is how we select them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you run in the primary process, like, let's go
Yeah.
to, I, did this in East Texas, just east of Dallas. And there was, a congressional district. That's another thing, we could get into in another show, maybe, about how we should go by the Constitution. And these congressional districts aren't supposed to be 800,000 plus people. It's supposed to be 32,000. We just have a lot more congressional districts. Would be great. I think we should do that to be a lot more representation. But the way that they do it, I mean, you got 800,000 people in that district. If you're going to, win the seat, you're going to have to win the Republican nomination for that office. But you go and you look at the actual numbers, then only about 50,000 people vote in the primary.
Yeah.
So of that 50,000, they'll just get the best consultants. They'll get the best mailers. They'll, convince that voting set who votes basically how the mailers tell them to do. And whoever has the most money, it's not always the truth or the case that the most money wins, but it's basically that. And it doesn't matter how you go out and stump and do all this other stuff. It's very hard to cross that threshold. So you're talking about 800,000 people, really dictated by what 35,000 people vote or something.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
really low
I
number.
experienced that. When I ran against Dr. Oz and
Yes.
several others here in Pennsylvania, I spent $1.6 million in that senatorial race between Dr. Oz and the other person we were in a statistical tie for first place, a three-way tie for first place. The two of them spent 60 million combined. I spent 1.6 million and I got over 330,000 votes. I got almost 30%. No one got a third. I think they
Oh,
barely
I
got
loved your
31.
campaign. I
I'm
love your
sorry.
campaign. I loved your
I
campaign.
mean,
I followed
and
it.
so you learn a lot, right? Money is important, but money was not the most important until those last 5 days. Those last 5 days, they had the money, they had the control of media, and they used it, every minute of it and every cent of it, to tell a different narrative. And so it is both, I think. And if Trump campaign can realize this, in 2016, he had the bottom up. The top down, they didn't like him. They didn't want him. They rejected him. But he had the bottom up, the grassroots up. Today, Donald Trump, I think he still has a lot of people at the grassroots level who adore him and will be voting for him. I will be voting for him. Um, However, there's very little energy from the grassroots up this time around. But there's a lot of top down going on, in the campaign. And wouldn't it be, I think if someone could have the presence of mind to do both, to have a bottom up and a top down approach. And I think that that is the winning strategy in the Republican Party, because we can't out cheat. We're not going to have enough communists. We're not going to have enough illegals. who are going to vote for us. So we got to find other ways. And I think for us, our strategy is, having a dual strategy of a top down and a bottom up. And then we meet somewhere in the middle.
I like that idea. I think that's the way it should be. And
I think it should
I,
be.
I again, I love the 2016 campaign. It was a little disorganized, but especially at the end, I love how hard President Trump worked. And
Yes. We were
I,
all working. It wasn't just Donald Trump. On 2016, it was bananas, the energy, everybody. It was personal. Like my personal effort is going to move this needle. Well, today it's like, oh, grassroots, just show up on November 5th. We
right.
got it from the top down. Y'all just show up November 5th and just vote and then go
Reminds
home.
me shades of 2020, because it was the same kind of feeling. Like I didn't see the same people showing up. I didn't see the same enthusiasm that we had in 2016. They didn't run the same type of commercials. If you go back to 2016, that's what people were hungering for. That 90-second commercial he released with with Steve Bannon, where it shows that like trillions are on the line for the elites. If we don't take this, like they're scared of you actually having a country. That's the message from the Trump campaign in
Yes,
2016,
and
and I
that
thought
should be, but today
that's what
is so sanitized. It's so
so
sterile.
sanitized. It's so
Yeah.
sanitized and sad. And we shall see. Like I said, I mean the
Yeah.
Supreme Court nominations alone make it I think good thing if we're talking about in the short run at least for a Trump victory. But I lament when people give up because we can't go, and it's not even about Republican or anything. It's about just giving up on accountability, saying, "Oh, my person won, so I'm done." You are not, because we got a
You're
lot more
not.
challenges ahead. I do think that, with what's happening with the currency and what's happening, that's not in the news, of course.
I wanna
But
have you back because I do wanna talk about the currency,
sure, love to come back.
because you're right, no one is talking about it. I barely talked about it because you talk about what people wanna hear, and no one was really talking about it when they would ask me the question about the economy, I would immediately start with the Federal Reserve.
Oh, I
And
love your
changing their
campaign.
mandates, right? And I cannot begin to tell you how many people came up to me and said, "We don't like that answer." Instead, what they wanted me to say, which everyone was saying, they start off with, "We're going to unleash the oil production, natural gas." And
They misunderstand.
applaud,
Yeah, I
everyone would
know.
applaud.
I know, it's very the what did Reagan say about, there are simple answers, just aren't any easy.
Yeah.
So there's you got, and I think it's more in the consciousness of people to talk about those issues, and you'll definitely be ahead of the ball if you do. I just happen to be way out in front. That's what I've been talking about for years. I don't even look at traditional headlines. I follow the
Yeah.
geopolitical financial stuff.
Yes.
That's where the language is. That's where
Mm.
the future is what watching what the BRICS nations are doing, watching what our footing, our foothold economically, what's happening with the petrodollar, stuff like that, gold,
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
These are things that where my wheelhouse is, but I would love to come back on anytime.
I would love to have that conversation. Let's talk about the Federal Reserve. I mean, and I would come up with cool analogies like, the economy is like a bike with, two pedals and a chain, and the chain is the Federal Reserve and it's broken. No. People talk about,
You just let
like
me
what if
do
I
it.
took this glass and spilled water and I would need something to come and absorb. No. People talk about natural gas. And then you'll get a high applause. I can't begin to tell you. And as such, the people are left ignorant on something that I think is very important. If we could, either abolish or change the mandates of the Federal Reserve, we would solve a lot of our problems in this country, especially those problems plaguing the poor community, which Democrats say they care about so much. But no one really talks about it because it's complicated and yeah, so we don't talk about it.
That's true. I've done my best to just distill it down so I can explain it in a way that it makes sense. Like you were talking about the analogies, make it a metaphor, whatever you got to do to get people to wrap their head around it. It's really not complicated though. At the end
Yeah.
of the day, and something Henry Ford said: if people understood the banking system, there'd be a revolution in the morning.
Mm, look at that. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about gold next time. I want to talk about all of these things, the Federal Reserve. So I am going to ask you to come back. I will make sure to
Anytime.
do that. This has been very encouraging. I have taken copious notes of what you said, especially of many of your quotes. I will be sharing them. Um, but I loved how you said you live in gratitude. And I think, I want to close on where we opened because it is a struggle. I feel it. I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna personalize all of this to me is that it is a struggle to know what we know, to see what we're seeing, to believe what we believe, and realize that, well, what can I do? What am I allowed to do? What can I do? What doors are open for me? Everything seems so overwhelming. And it absolutely can be oppressive and pressure filled. And I was talking to my husband last night is that I'm it is now a habit of me feeling this way, but redirecting my focus, kind of like what you said, not allowing myself to have a loss of memory. I have an amazing husband who loves me. I have two amazing children who are doing so well in life. My family is safe and healthy. We're healthy. I'm healthy. And I literally have to go through the day and count my blessings. I remember hearing that as a child, and sometimes we forget. We become so sophisticated. But it's really going back to those roots, those fundamental roots of counting my blessings, remembering the things we have to be grateful for. And I'm grateful for this country. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for knowing history and being able to talk about it. So I will give you the last word, Tony.
That's a wonderful synopsis of what we discussed, and it really it's about mindset, and I think this is very spiritual. How we approach it is going to
Yeah.
determine the outcome. And like I said, I think we have uh, monumental challenges, and thank God for that because we have clarity. We know what we're up against, and we know what we represent. So, again, it's about changing yourself. You want to change the world, change yourself. Do
Mm.
something kind for somebody. Do something. I try to do this as much as I can. I just try to exude that. It's very hard, by the way. It's very tough because
Mm.
not every there's a lot. We're at war with a lot with the established order of things, and there's a feel a frequency in the air. You can feel it
I can feel it.
that is negative, and I
Mhm.
think we're all kind of on edge. But the more that you offset that with your actions and just focusing on what you can change,
Mm.
having the wisdom to know the difference, like the Serenity Prayer, like what can you change? What can you make better today? That's what I try to do in my business and my life, and I fall short, but all the time. But again, I get to talk to great people like you. There's people making a difference everywhere. We're not alone. We do feel isolated because of technology, but um, go and talk to somebody in the real world. It'll help. Get off your phone.
Oh my goodness, I feel overwhelmed, feel emotional because there is so much truth in that. This has been such an encouragement and this does help. So I hope this has also helped the rest of you who are listening. I appreciate each and every one. You know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button right after that. Leave a comment. We're unlike 2020, we're in this together. In 2024, we're really in this together. And so that's the reason why I do what I do. To each and every one of you, blessings and see you next time.